friend and father, then my world was shattered. Wishing you would come here again, wishing you would come here. Sometimes it seemed, if I just dreamed, somehow you would be here. Wishing I could hear your voice again, knowing that I never would. Dreaming of you would help me to do all that you dreamed I could. Buzzing bells and sparkling angels, cold and warm you meant seem for you all the planets. You are warm and many years fighting back tears, I can't forget your sky. Wishing you were somehow here again, knowing we must say goodbye. Try to forgive, teach me to live, give me the strength to try. No more memories, no more silent tears, no more using the cross, always spread years. Help me say goodbye. Help me say goodbye.
What an amazing day to be together to celebrate the service that Michelle has given to Wychwood. As the new head here, I've been in post for a year. So those of you who haven't met me yet, my name's Jane Evans. I had the privilege of meeting Michelle very early on in that, those first few weeks and first term. And I can tell you now, she emblazoned in me the spirit that actually sits behind this school, and encouraged me to feel even stronger that desire to stay here, to commit myself to be here at this school. And I think that she's an incredible individual, and I know you're all going to go on and celebrate so many things about her. But even in that tiny bit of time that I met her, she really did enable me to commit to this school and to be here, and I cannot thank her enough for that. It was very special. And one of the things that she really made me consider and promise to her is that I would continue to do what the founders of this school set out to do, and that is to ensure that Wychwood is a progressive beacon, teaching academic subjects to our pupils, enabling them to become strong, confident individuals, equipped with life skills to enable them to flourish. And we're going to hear so many stories and tributes, really, to a woman who very much has been so hugely part of that history of the school. I'm going to hand over now to Dula, as an old girl and as the chair of the Wychwood Association, to lead us through the next bit.
Thank you. On behalf of the Wychwood Association Committee, I wanted to join Jane in welcoming back to Wychwood today, to this celebration of service for Michelle Wychwood. Over the next 90 minutes, you'll hear much about Michelle and her legacy, not only with regards to the school, but you'll also hear many personal accounts of the lasting impact she has had on so many of us here today. And hopefully you'll be reminded of some of your own special memories. One thing that will become very apparent is how central Wychwood was to Michelle throughout her adult life. She dedicated her whole career to it, and then once retired, she continued to serve on the Wychwood Association Committee and the Board of Governors. After this service, we invite you to join us for lunch, which will be served in the Crawford Rooms and on the lawns. During this time, we will be collecting donations for several items for the school, which will be presented in Michelle's name. If you would like to contribute, please find me or another member of the Wychwood Association, and we will be happy to tell you more about what the funds will be used for and how you can donate. Thank you.
So, good afternoon everybody, and thank you so much for coming. In the time-honoured fashion of an assembled group in a school hall or hut, I know, bilingual things, in just a moment we're actually going to start by singing a hymn, a traditional school hymn, and one that Michelle would have chosen at the start of many a term, given the metaphorical potential of the words. It is Lord of all hopefulness that of course starts at the break of the day and then moves on to noon and then to the eve and then to the end of the day. And it is fitting for us today, not just because young Michelle demonstrated something of a very early determination with words when she set herself the target of learning all the words in her church hymnal, and succeeded, of course, but also because of that word hopefulness in the title, because today is a celebration of the service of Michelle and a time to celebrate the hope that Michelle shared from the moment of her arrival in this unique and wonderful school, through her pastoral care, her English teaching, her leadership and her governance. And it is a time to reflect on how that has impacted and enriched all of our lives, every one of us present, and the many more who are unable to be here today. This hymn is a prayer for bliss, for strength, for love, and for peace in our hearts, all most fitting for a celebration of Michelle today. So please do stand and sing Lord of all
Sweet rain, oh,
Michelle's day was at Marple, then Cheshire, now Greater Manchester, and the period of her life is probably best explained by a fantastic article that I found in the 95 Elm by Caroline Bozovich and Roshani Kalamakumbara. I'm really sorry for that pronunciation. It was in the Elm, edited by Sally Dugan, and she was an English teaching colleague of Michelle for many years. And it was entitled Flowers, Duckies and Flying Chalks, Miss Crawford. Jenny is going to read this for us, and in the absence of an image from that time, we have an image from an early field course near Wychwood, or from Wychwood, in the 70s, and it captures something of the energy and the freedom of the time. The magazine article starts as follows.
Miss Crawford's childhood passed in a perpetual haze of summer, which she spent wearing shorts, pigtails and playing cricket in her neighbours' cornfields. She attended a minuscule prep school, and being the bright young thing she was, at 7 was promoted to the 11 plus class. After her triumph at primary school, she attended a very academic school in Manchester. This was Withington Girls' School. From the age of 12, she knew she was destined to be an English teacher, which was partly the effect of reading poetry, and also the influence of an English teacher. At the tender age of 13, she started practicing class control by teaching children of 11 in her Sunday school. School itself was not particularly memorable, but the journey was quite a vivid experience. Miss Crawford travelled to school daily on a steam train after running a long 1.5 miles, wildly clutching books, hockey stick, lacrosse stick and school hat. Once inside the train, she would play various games such as Blind Man's Buff, and the girls would also place their hats over the carriage lights when the train went through the tunnels, thereby plunging the whole carriage into complete darkness, enlivening the games but inconveniencing the rest of the newspaper-reading commuters. Miss Crawford then proceeded to Exeter University to read English, and she did her teacher training in Nottingham University. The 60s passed with Miss Crawford wearing a headband, plaits, and strumming a guitar to the mellow tunes of Joan Baez.
When Michelle first arrived in 1971 to teach English, there was only one set of books in the English room, The Pilgrim's Progress. And hopeful, as it happens, is the last companion of Christian the Pilgrim, and he urges him on as he faces the river. For Michelle, as a committed Christian, faith, hope and love were what she lived by. And she was never many months away from a pilgrimage, though, to be fair, she actually was more keen on being involved in a pilgrimage than on Christian's particular progress. She ditched, her word, Bunyan's book as soon as she could, and she explained this to her LT Form as they celebrated her 100th term in Michaelmas 2002. 100th term. Joanna Stevenson and Deborah Pluck listened on as Michelle explained what life had been like at the start or the break of her day at Wychwood. And we thought it might be rather special to hear all of this in her exact words, which Dula will share.
Celebration Day. Today is Celebration Day, and I am enjoying a personal celebration. It's my 100th term at Wychwood, indeed my centimeversary, and to the equivalent date, 100 terms since I first received a paycheck from Wychwood. In those days, we were paid half-termly, so the first 6 weeks had been rather difficult. I remember it well. The cheque was for £60, and I suddenly felt rich. But I had earned my salary. My job was teaching English to every form in the school, including 2 O-levels and an A-level. That was certainly demanding, but in addition, I had to teach drama to the inters, last period on Friday afternoon. The headmistress thought it a good idea that the inters let off steam before the weekend. I had no steam left, and I had no idea how to teach drama, so I just made it up as I went along, and nobody got injured. Even more strangely, I was expected to help with remove hockey. This was quite exciting. As at school and university, I played lacrosse, not hockey, where the ball flies through the air and there were few boundaries. So there was an element of St. Trinity's about the lessons, with small girls and flaming hockey sticks. And I made it up as I went along, and thankfully, nobody got injured. was certainly a 24-hour job. As the resident member of staff in 2 and 4, I shared the spartan conditions of those days with little heating and interruptions at night if anyone was ill. All this for £10 a week. What sort of a strange school had I come to? It was very, very different from my own school experience. The headmistress, Miss Snodgrass, was unlike anybody I had ever met. Brilliant, idiosyncratic, wise, and totally eccentric. She lived with her Siamese cat, Mink, in the main building and knew everything that went on in the school. She certainly knew exactly what I was teaching and to whom without ever coming to one of my lessons. The assistant laundry matron, Miss Sturt, also resident in what is now the Gap Room in St John's, sorted the laundry, taught A-level Latin and Greek, wrote books in her spare time, and was a compendium of classical knowledge which she generously shared with me as I prepared my first A-level courses. There were no books in the English room except a set of Pilgrim's Progress for children and a few volumes of poetry, brilliantly annotated by the school's founder, Miss Lee, in the 1920s, when she had taught there senior literature classes, and I still had those. I managed to lose Pilgrim's Progress and persuaded Miss Snodgrass to let me buy a set of The Silver Sword instead. On the first day in my new job, I was thrown in at the deep end. I was told, "You're the form Miss Transits because they live in the English room." So I accosted a passing child, Annabelle as she was called, and said, "Take me to the lower transits." "What is a form meeting? What do you do in a form meeting?" They told me. I did it. I made it up as I went along, and nobody got in. And I'm still doing it, so that's well over 1,000 LT form meetings. I lived in the attic of 2 and 4, mostly on my wits and my principles, teaching grammar to the remove, which was a very daring thing to do at the time, teaching an unusually anarchic upper transits, probably the most difficult form of which was history, in the hope that they might pass O-level. Gradually stocking the English room shelves and learning to identify and interpret every creak on the uncarpeted stairs and landings of 2 and 4 in the dead of night. One morning in September was particularly memorable. I was teaching a distinctly difficult class when I was called from the English room and taken to the top of the building into a bedroom called Gables. I was then made to climb out of the window and lowered in a sling under my armpits, spinning wildly with ivy in my hair down to the garden below. This was fire practice for new resident staff. The headmistress had apparently not thought it a problem that I was dangled as a spectacle right in front of the window where my literature class was waiting for my return. I did the only thing possible in those circumstances, picked the ivy out of my hair, marched through the French windows, and picked up the text again, mid-iambic pentameter. It didn't do much for my dignity or class control, or the start of my career. I still have the letter of appointment, 5 handwritten pages from Miss Snodgrass, which includes the sentences, "I am particularly looking for an English teacher who will settle." This, of course, is a magic word. We have a great number of young staff here, and naturally, they never settle. They marry as soon as they see Oxford. 2 years or 3 years with luck seems to be the average. This explained to me belatedly the unorthodox opening of my interview with Miss Snodgrass. "Have you got a boyfriend?" What would the politically correct make of that nowadays? The letter eventually offered me the job and said, I'm thinking on the assumption that you would like 2 or 3 or 4 years even here. And I felt pretty sure we should be pleased if you felt that too. I did feel that. I turned down a place I had just been offered to go and do a further degree the following year, and I started at Wychwood. In that first year, I taught myself to teach. I made it up as I went along, and nobody got injured. And I must have done reasonably well, because 2 of my pupils from that memorable first half term are here today. Now the chairman of the Wychwood Association, Friends of Wychwood, Leighton Wychwood Association, and the chairman of the Board of Governors. And they are both immensely well educated.
So Joanna Stevenson, that chair of Friends of Wychwood, whose daughter Anna was part of the LT form, had described the impact of Michelle as a new and young English teacher arriving in 1971, when she wrote an article for the Elm in 2009, the year that Michelle retired. And Lucy is going to share that with us.
They say that all the best teachers have a nickname. Michelle Crawford was cruel to us from the day she arrived at Wychwood. Our new English teacher, and lucky for us, Lower Transit's form teacher. Our previous English teacher was a fragile flower who wore fabulous belts and had the smallest waist in the world. I remember nothing of her lessons, but I do remember very clearly what happened next. Craw arrived, a graduate from Exeter University, fresh-faced, energetic and unconventional, grabbed us by the ears and swept us through 5 years on a voyage of discovery that marked us forever. Together we learned everything there was to know about grammar, developed a passion for Keats, wept over Richard II, lurched through the owl service, laughed with Chaucer and got right under the skin of Dylan Thomas. Our imaginary village, Little Stalking on the Swaff, was the prototype for a Craw special that generations of Wychwoodites will know well. Memories. Where do I start? Among the many highlights were our annual birthday party for Keats in Craw's room at the top of 2 and 4. The look on her face when the deliciously young Ian McKellen took off his clothes in a performance of King Lear, to a clatter of coins as we frantically unlocked our pay-as-you-go binoculars. I can imagine that. Craw in full Wychwood uniform when the rest of us had home clothes day. The list goes on. My personal debt is huge. I followed Craw to live in Hope at Exeter. I read English, of course, became a publisher's editor, bless you for my grammar, read Keats to my long-standing toddlers, and later sent my daughters to Wychwood to discover Shakespeare, the owl service, and the intricacies of English grammar with the very best of teachers.
The 1995 article that Carolina Luciani wrote went on to astutely observe.
This bastion of all things traditional was actually a revolutionary in her youth. She believes that her fundamental principles, her eternal verities, have not altered and still remain the foundation of her teaching. We love to be accurate in these matters, and so these eternal verities are strong faith, justice, and fidelity. She also believes that a strong sense of truth and clear principles are vital if you have any contact with the young and misguided. Miss Crawford believes passionately that certain things need to be taught and is in her natural element in a classroom. She naturally has strong opinions on what consists a good teacher. One important thing is being able to focus on the instant and make every lesson matter. Another is having expressive eyebrows, which can communicate more lucidly than many words can. It ended, Miss Crawford enjoys teaching at Wychwood. As she says, Wychwood suits her. Perhaps to be more accurate, she has moulded Wychwood to suit her. She approves of the way children are allowed to relate to teachers as normal people of the same race. However, she absolutely hates the communal watching of that trashy soap opera, Neighbours. But it was voted in by council. She has been forced, alas, to accept it. Miss Crawford is one of those rare individuals who actually enjoys the company of children. She enjoyed the study midnight feasts and even remembers fondly when Study 2 burst into her room when Prince William was born and demanded alcohol to toast the future. Far from sending them disgustingly back to bed, a bleary-eyed Miss Crawford shared some homemade fizzy apple wine in a toast. Of course she did.
Pupils who accompanied Michelle and Bridget Crampton on a trip to Edale in Derbyshire in 1977 saw both sides of their teacher, as Lucy is going to recount a lesson on the importance of clear principles given in the beauty of the Peak District National Park, following an evening episode.
In 1977, Michelle and Bridget Crampton arranged to take us, the lower transits, to Edale in Derbyshire. This was the first trip they'd ever organised, and we were all very excited to be going. We arrived, duly kitted up, and experienced firsthand the lovely views of the beautiful landscape and mountain streams in this picturesque, dark Peak village. We stayed in a YHA youth hostel, all of us, including Bridget and Michelle, in one large dormitory. Later that night, there appeared to be rather an exodus of girls leaving our dormitory, and then returning a few hours later. Sadly for them, they were not particularly quiet. In the morning, we had a surprisingly quick breakfast and an even more surprising and hasty exit from the hostel to begin our day's walking. We'd been walking for about 20 minutes when Michelle and Bridget found a quiet spot, quite beautiful as I recall, and told us very certainly, and in no uncertain terms, to sit down and listen. Michelle then proceeded to give us the dressing down of our lives. It was, we discovered, absolutely not on to visit the boys' dormitory. When we were on a school trip, we bowed our heads to the ground in shame, no one daring to make eye contact with quite such an angry teacher. Quite rightly, she was furious. She explained that it damaged Wychwood's reputation. Furthermore, there was a fear of us being banned from YHA hostels completely, thus jeopardising any future school trips. A little unfortunate given this was our first. Now, of course, from an adult perspective, I can entirely understand why they were both upset, particularly as they'd gone out on a limb to take us there in the first place. Michelle was young and she was great fun, but she certainly made it very clear where the professional line was drawn, and that to cross it would be only to our very foolish peril.
But then Michelle actually did encounter a little peril herself on future trips, and a series of photographs that were unearthed at a 1980s reunion revealed this unfortunate sequence of events. A rather sticky situation. Nothing, of course, but a team from Wychwood were unable to overcome. Because it is amazing what 3 strategic minds and a little brute force can achieve. Although, we don't think there could have been much hope for the washing machine once those jeans went to the laundry. She clearly loved an outdoor adventure, and Mrs. Duffel's tribute to her on her retirement recalled a particular memorable week involving a study exchange when Wychwood biologists went to North Wales to study the seashore at Anglesey in exchange for a cultural week in Stratford and London.
So this is Mrs. Duffel's words. I forever remember Michelle sitting at a formal dinner the first evening explaining to a bewildered collection of teachers, school council, and the philosophy of girls making the rules, the majors and the minors, the alpha system, orgy, lost property in the time, staff holidays and form plays, the names of the bedrooms and why the red room was not red, and why we called business studies an apple tree, and why the removed common room was called ping. On a field trip, my car group lost Miss Crawford's, and after driving around Anglesey for some time not finding them, one of the studies suggested we stop at either the next church or the next pub, because that's where Miss Crawford would be. Wychwood girls always had the right answer. Mrs. Duffel finished. Michelle is a very special person and has given a lifetime of energy to the girls at Wychwood.
Mrs. Duffel was the 3rd headmistress under whom Michelle served. This photograph captured the moment in the centenary year when the 4 heads, following Miss Lee, Miss Batty and Miss Costa, were photographed together. And remarkably, Michelle worked with Ginna Snodgrass, Johann Schuler, Leslie Duffel and Sue Wingfield Digby, and with subsequent heads, Mrs. Andrea Johnson and Mrs. Jane Evans as a governor of the school. Michelle spoke at the memorial service of Mrs. Schuler in 2014 and revealed a rather surprising story. She had discussed this, or these days would the word be disclosed this, some years earlier to Daisy's mum, Amanda Hay, who was writing a centenary review at the time. We have some lovely images of those celebrations. Daisy as Miss Lee, and the school picnic at the Wychwood Forest, and the tree that was planted, and I don't think it's done very well. And Mrs. Duffel, Miss Snodgrass and Derek Jones, Chair of Governors, as well as the whole office team in the year when Mrs. Duffel handed the headship over to Mrs. Wingfield Digby. Michelle is photographed here being a really good sport at the centenary fancy dress. But Daisy's going to tell us more about Michelle's aforementioned disclosure and another example of her being either A, a very good sport, or B, well, we'll leave that up to you.
In her tribute to Johann Schiller, Michelle said, "I took to the school almost immediately, and they seemed to take to me. Perhaps Jenna recognised me as a fellow churchgoer and Johann as a fellow drinker and smoker. Whatever the reasons, I soon felt appreciated, trusted, and given space to develop as a teacher under kindly but sharp eyes. And not only under their eyes, but also under their noses. Soon after my arrival, it was feared that the tendencies towards freedom and anarchy of Oxford students were penetrating Wychwood, and that exotic substances might have been smoked by visitors to the Shell Common. The problem was that neither Gina Snodgrass nor Johann knew what to try to detect. Solutions. One evening in Johann's sitting room in Northmore Road, with heavy velvet curtains tightly closed, I was presented with a couple of joints and asked to I was, of course, a recent graduate and a smoker, but had also avoided such delights while at university. I shall never forget the sight of two elderly North Oxford ladies. I'm sorry. I'm not radio broadcasting, I never thought. Sniffing avidly like hunting dogs as I valiantly wheezed on my first experience. It was an educational experience for us all, though not one for the CV. Luckily, I never left, so never had to write a full CV. Who would have known?
So, also in her tribute, Michelle touched on more serious issues that we've seen here with Michelle and other members of her cohort at the centenary, I think, will share with us again in Michelle's words.
When Johanna retired, we made a patchwork quilt for her. Every girl stitched pieces for weeks, often surreptitiously in English lit lessons as I rented them. All staff, even the occasional part-time teachers, all the cooks and cleaners, the gardener and the handyman, produced their contributions, and we put it all together in my flat. It was truly a work of our affection and respect, unusual, I think, as a tribute to a departing headmistress, but absolutely right for Johann and for Wychwood in that it reflected all of us. I could continue on reflections of personal friendships as these, just as with Gina, continued and blossomed beyond her retirement. Apart from innumerable gin and tonics over chats about every aspect of Wychwood, I enjoyed watering her garden and its peaceful beauty while she was in France. In 1982, Bridget and I accompanied her on a wonderful holiday in her Maurice traveller to Provence. In 1981, I responded to her desire for a lodger for her large front room, preferably male, independent, quiet, postgraduate, and above all, not given to cooking and filling the house with cooking aroma. I recommended my friend David, who was able to exist on a nightly meal of cheese on toast for 4 years. And I think Joanne was torn between regret for her loss for the perfect lodger and approval of our marriage in 1985.
Now, a teaching role at Wychwood is a pleasure that impacts far more than just that one person employed in any given household. And this probably brings us to the noon of Michelle's day, since, as she said in 1985, 14 years after that arrival that had taken the school by storm, she married David Smith on the 20th of July in St Margaret's Church on St Margaret's Day. And thereafter, celebrations occurred in the school hut. Where else? With all those happy memories of sorting through clothes. Although, to be fair, it was a glorious day. And here is Michelle with Gina Snodgrass. And in a memoir of Gina, David wrote, "I'm pretty sure she knew of our engagement before it happened. She slipped into my lodgings in Johann Schuller's house to say, Exciting news! I'm so pleased. Straight look. I think you've done very well. Tactful adjustment. I mean, you've both done very well, of course. Clearly, the guests had a great time in the Witchwood grounds, and frankly, once Michelle was in the hut, this now iconic photograph demonstrates that the hut was indeed the perfect place to enjoy a perfect day in the perfect way. And in spite of this, to an average teacher, a wedding reception in the school hall with every child on roll invited does seem like a rare commitment from both Michelle and David. We gather a priority of Michelle's on the special day was that the girls were happy and that there was plenty for the girls to eat. Ever the pastoral lead. At Michelle's funeral, David said of the marriage that it was the easiest thing in my entire life, and Michelle, he knows, said the same in reverse. Following the marriage ceremony, they lived at Witchwood in 2 and 4, and that 95 magazine article described it.
She met her husband, Dr. Smith, at St Margaret's. Dr. Smith also read English and is now the librarian at St Anne's College. They lived in Witchwood for 5 years, and Dr. Smith says that he always found the girls unfailingly polite and friendly. Never miss an opportunity to sell ourselves. He went on stage in at least 2 UT's parties, and now enjoys the occasional supper with study English groups.
In Mrs. Wingfield's Digby's tribute to Michelle on the occasion of her retirement, she observed,
"She has been my right hand for the past 12 years. She has been my friend, my confidant, my advisor, my role model, my loyal supporter, and my sounding board. And for this I will be unfailingly grateful. No one knows and understands Witchwood as Michelle does. No one has been part of it for so long. No one has ever made such an impact on so many lives. No one has been so loved and appreciated." As she continued, "Throughout the time that I have known Michelle, she has been wonderfully supported by her husband David Smith, and I wouldn't want to end this tribute without giving him a mention personally and on behalf of the school for doing such a good job as Mr. or Dr. Crawford."
Last December, David was encouraged by Michelle to stand on a slightly wobbly chair and to light the significant number of candles in the candelabra with minutes to spare before the 2022 Witchwood Carol service. She was exacting in what she knew was right, and I think you were applauded at the time. David, you have been such a part of this school. You are leaving for your honeymoon, coming out at 2 and 4. You were Johan's lodger, you lived in the 2 and 4 flat, you were happy to go into property with Gina and Michelle, of course, and you have been a committed male voice at our carol services for as long as I can remember, and as Michelle's husband, you remain such a very important part of this community and its history. For all that you have done for Witchwood, we know that Michelle would have wanted us to thank you as much as to honour her today. And we do thank you most sincerely. You know the impact that Michelle had on so many pupils, because so many pupils reached out to you, but it was you that were supporting Michelle in being able to do that. Speaking of that impact, such was the lasting love of literature for those at school in the 80s that a Witchwood Association book group was formed, and Michelle was immediately approached and advised on the reading list. How very special to have that wonderful record of some thoughts from Michelle, and there should have been copies for everyone as you came in. There were also comments on some of Michelle's key texts. This is what she said about the Silver Sword. The slide is in Times New Roman. Her commitment to that font, as well as to having everything on only one side of A4, as documented by Sue Wingfield Digby, was beyond all others. Daisy Hay was a pupil here in the 90s and considered how an education from Michelle has impacted her life and the lives of others.
I first met Michelle in the autumn of 1991 when, as an exceptionally nervous 10-year-old, I came to a Witchwood open evening with my father. The week before, we'd been to an open evening at the high school, where every enormous swinging door had convinced me that I would just never survive secondary school. As a result, my father was doing most of the talking, so that when we came to the English room where Michelle was holding court, it was he who told her that I loved books, all the books, but that I couldn't spell or write in a straight line. She looked at me and smiled and patted the front row desk she was standing next to. "You will come here and sit here," she told me calmly. "We will fix the spelling, and there will be lots and lots of books." I traced my transmogrification from terrified child to a writer and university professor of English to that moment. Michelle taught me about Shakespeare and Chaucer and Milton and Donne and Marvel and Austen and Bronte and Healy and so much more. Under her guidance, I found in my hands the keys to a kingdom of literature in which I went on to build my life. Since she died, I've been trying to work out what it was that made her such a truly exceptional teacher. It was in part the splendour of the greatest hits classroom moments that others have talked of with such affection: the owl service plate, the villages, the single-handed annual performance of the fifth act of Twelfth Night, staged in front of the blackboard, chalk still in hand for the benefit of passing shells. And of course, it had to do with the clarity of expression with which she made complicated things seem straightforward, or at least culinary, reducing similes to onions or soufflés, essay plans to shopping trolleys. I have taught countless undergraduate students how to structure their work according to the Michelle Crawford essay planning method. A few weeks ago, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote it out in all its 14-point glory for my own 12-year-old as he contemplated the task of writing his first ever essay. Step 1, read the question. Step 2, read the question. Step 3, think. Step 4, read the question again. And off you go, secure in a structure that gives you access to a world of thought and experiment. For me, however, at the core of Michelle's greatness as a teacher was her brilliance as a reader. She didn't just teach me about books read in her classroom. Much more fundamentally, she taught me and generations of us here and all over the world how to read, how to look for complexity, how to think through it, how to deal with difficulty, how to approach a text not like some Victorian explorer, butterfly net in hand for the catching of errant metaphors, but with nuance and sensitivity. All that was integral to her own reading, particularly of poetry, which she loved and read with enormous acuity. But I don't mean to make her sound precious about reading, because she really wasn't. I delighted in her common sense approach to literature. I particularly remember her description of Milton responding to the need to give Adam and Eve something to do in the Garden of Eden, with an activity she termed gentle gardening, a phrase I still think of when I read Paradise Lost. She loved literature with a passion that grew rather than dimmed over her decades in the classroom, partly because she was never bounded by ephemeral contemporary fashions. Not for her A-level students, a weedy diet of ephemeral contemporary literature. Several years ago, I found a typewritten document entitled "Things a Well-Educated Study Girl Should Have Read," and I found myself thinking that I could easily have retitled it "Things Every Well-Educated English Graduate Should Have Read," with probably about the same coverage rate. When I arrived in Cambridge for my undergraduate interview at the end of 1998, Professor Heather Glenn looked at me over her spectacles and said severely, "I think you've been exceptionally well taught." There was nothing I could do but agree, but not mutely this time, since under Michelle's wing I found my voice. I've talked about Michelle in terms of her reading, but so much of what I said about her applies not just to how she read books, but to how she lived, how she read people, and to her service to the community she shaped. Sensitivity, curiosity, humility, a certain affectionate scepticism. In these qualities, Michelle modelled not just a way of reading, but a way of being in the world. As her retirement approached, she told me over cups of tea in the light-filled kitchen in Southdale Road about her plans for her retirement gift to the school. The prize she was terming was characteristic punning delight, the good egg cup. It struck me then that she was, unconsciously perhaps, designing a prize for a person who demonstrated some of the qualities she herself embodied: thoughtful of others but rigorous in her own thinking, caring but not cloying, someone with the capacity to bring but also take delight in the good things in life: friends, books, a job well done, the sense that it was always possible for an individual to make the world around them a better place. As a writer with a particular interest in what Virginia Woolf capaciously termed life writing, I spend a lot of time thinking about how to capture the essence of a life, how to pin it on the page without reducing it like that Victorian butterfly net wielder to less than the sum of its parts. As I've got older, I've come to realise that the most meaningful measure of a life is surely the way an individual shapes the lives of those with whom he or she coincides. By this token, Michelle was utterly unique. It is thanks to her that those of us in this hall, and thousands more, know how to write a letter, address an envelope, string an impeccably grammatical sentence together, read a book. But more than that, she offered us, so many of us, a model of how to live, how to be. It is thanks to her that my own life has been enriched by the literature she taught me to love from the moment I crossed the threshold of her classroom. The writer, Frances Spufford, has said of childhood reading that the words we take into ourselves help to shape us. They help form the questions we think are worth asking. They shift around the boundaries of the sayable inside us. They build and stretch and build again the chambers of our imagination. In my childhood, Michelle became the chief architect of those imaginative chambers, encouraging me to be ambitious in reading, to follow my own nose as well as hers. She taught me not to give up if the beginning was hard, because if you sat like Twelfth Night Viola, as Patience on a Monument, but with a book rather than your own lovelorn misery in hand, you would always get somewhere interesting. She taught me how to read and write and teach and be. She taught me how to spell too, which quite frankly was no mean feat.
At this point, we thought it would be lovely to hear Fran Lambert's poem, Miss Crawford. Fran preferred texts that were not on the A-level syllabus, and so she didn't take A-level English, but Michelle taught her great literature alongside her science A-levels between 2002 and 2004. And it was bespoke teaching and a commitment to learning, as well as an excuse to teach her favourite texts. And Fran references the ever-popular Sweetie tin, the blackboard, that Mrs. Wingfield Digby ensured remained in the English room, because that was Michelle's preferred writing aid, not thinking much of the modern whiteboard. And while we read Fran's poem, you can see the actual A-level group of those years: Vicky, Flo, Louise and Ellie, many of you here, celebrating the end of their course with their very grateful teachers. Miss Crawford, astute, without a doubt, her ears catching, mind preempting all those clever whispered conferences. She made a great fuss of our trainers and handwriting and understanding. Our understanding of love. What love? Stitch into the words of Wyatt and Donne, the flea and the sun. What is the summer's day to the poet? She always left questions for our lives to unwind, and they may. Never trusted young minds with a simple answer, but planted her teaching for roots to grow there. She kept us in mind more than we kept ourselves. Untied shoelaces slapping at legs, running, forgetting to close doors softly. We dodged the majors and bloomed with our alphas. She grew with us, giving us more, training us less, and let us go too. Remember the days when the seasons would change, and you would explain just a sketch of syllables, how the years had changed the school, how autumn brought new pupils, and spring set them into a whirl, spun them away. You taught me more than sentence structure, but never forgot about sentence structure. Never forgot to draw out the sweetie tin, the vision, and the chalk. In 2008, we became beneficiaries of a number of pieces of art and a poetry collection by Charlotte Kell, a pupil who had been here from 1955 to 1961, BM, before Michelle. That legacy allows us to run an annual poetry competition, and Michelle has always been a critical eye on the judging panel. She decided the prize should be an experience allowing for the discussion of poetry, and so each year the winner go to tea at the Randolph Hotel. Michelle's enthusiasm for poetry lives on. And we remember that in 2002, Michelle also went to Buckingham Palace with Laura Cragen, who had won the Golden Jubilee Senior Poetry Award for her poem Burmese, The Queen's Horse Speaks for the Cavalry. It was a wonderful, if ironic, outcome for the pupil and teacher whose relationship had struggled initially, in that Laura wrote, Miss Crawford pounced on my storytelling potential, but tried to dissuade me from the predominant subject matter. Gently at first, and then as my rough book gathered more and more horsey doodles, more forcefully, your prep is to write such and such a story. No ponies, Laura, she would roar. Burmese, the Queen's Horse speaks for the cavalry. It wasn't, of course, Michelle's only visit to Buckingham Palace. On the 13th of May 2014, with David, she attended an investiture by the Duke of Gloucester in Oxford, which cited her service to young people, both in her professional career at Wychwood and in her many years of voluntary service. And this included work with Student Cross, and didn't even represent everything she had done at St Margaret's Church. And then on June the 10th, 2014, Michelle and David went to Buckingham Palace for a garden party. Michelle was obviously far more than an outstanding teacher of English. At the time of her retirement, Vicky Jewson, a leaver in 2004, whose sister, mother and aunt had been to the school and been taught by Michelle, wrote that Michelle was always teaching far more than literature. And we thought it important, therefore, to consider some of the life lessons that Michelle imparted. And so Jenny, one of 4 sisters attending the school at the time, is going to take the lead on this.
See that slide. More or less exactly 20 years ago, a somewhat shocking passage of time, now I explicitly reflect on it, a form group of 13-year-old girls trudged into the old hut, dutifully sat on the floor that so many green skirts had graced in the past. It was time for another assembly, a ritual in all schools that inevitably becomes a routine, something we all must do in order to traverse the rite of passage from craning your neck up at the stage, progressing to the hallowed wobbly benches at the back, and possibly one day having a chair at the side of the room as a counsellor. Incidentally, I actually remember the first assembly in this particular configuration, and the outrage that we felt as Shell that the removes was spared the indignity of sitting on the floor, and the ensuing knob legs and ladders in tights, but I digress. So this particular day in 2003, Michelle, Miss Crawford, as she still was to me then, climbed the steps to the stage and with her typical kind authority, looked down at us with gently raised eyebrows, pursed lips and a knowing look in her eye. Her fingers fluttered as, without a word, she reached to the desk at her side and brandished a paper plate. With her other hand, she reached for a tube of toothpaste. Holding both aloft in front of her, she proceeded to squeeze the entirety of the tube onto the plate in one long, minty, messy heap. As with many things that Miss Crawford taught us, this was a metaphor. You see, this particular class of 13-year-olds, her form group in LTs, had recently had what I, as a teacher now, figuratively refer to as a spicy few days. Unkind words had been said, alliances established, and grudges had been declared in the way that only teenagers truly know how to foster. And it was not okay. We needed to be taught, to be shown that what we say matters. That striped heap of red, blue and white were our words. Words that once said cannot be unsaid. Michelle knew that we didn't need to be told what was right from wrong. She knew from her decades of experience that ranting at teenagers is unlikely to get you anywhere. She knew, in her formidable way, that sometimes the best way to talk about words was without words at all. I think this is true of many things that Michelle taught many of us outside of the English classroom. We've heard stories today of inspirational lessons, reading lists, essay techniques and grammar rules. However, we will all remember the other strategies she used to send us off into the big wide world beyond Witchwood, equipped with more than a knowledge of the dangers of split infinitives. Whether it was playfully barking at us in lieu of admonishing us for asking inane questions and remove, a technique that she called puppy training, to encourage our independence and maturity, or eating an entire can of dog food, actually chocolate mousse, as a lesson in not judging a book by its cover. Or a quiet cup of tea in her office with a girl struggling to find her place in her family, her peer group, or her future profession. Michelle knew just what to say and also, more importantly, when to say nothing at all. For me, to borrow another Crawfordism, the little gobbets that I still reflect on and take with me into my adult life, both professional and personal, are the gobbets of wisdom that peppered her lessons, her assemblies, her conversations, her letters, and her silences. She had a way of looking at you and you knew what she meant. With all of her words, both spoken and unsaid, she fostered and grew in every girl she taught their own self-worth and their own sense of self. Witchwood famously prides itself on teaching the individual student, and Michelle probably taught thousands of us, and yet none of us have left school the same. We are all individuals, strong, driven, motivated, and inspired in our own right, and I believe that is in no small part due to the model we had in Miss Crawford. She was a champion and a coach for us all, gently guiding us to our own paths, but also towards being good people, strong women, and in some way we all have become the teachers as we continue to pass on the lessons that she taught us.
Of course, they always say that as a teacher, you are also a social worker, a counsellor, and. But Michelle did always pride herself on her many hats, as she would call them, that she had to wear and balance in her various roles at school. As SENCO, Special Educational Needs Coordinator, as it was called then, she was responsible for facilitating the needs of her learners. And she was also never going to be told which needs could and could not be managed in mainstream school. The time, care, compassion and commitment she gave to that role, coupled with her indomitable spirit to make things happen, was unparalleled. Ali Adams wrote a poem on the Sweetie tin for Michelle's retirement, and Jenny, another recipient from that tin, will read to us.
Sweetie tin. Eat sweeties now in memory of English lessons. Only thing I remember, unfortunately. Saw it pass from eager little girl to eager little girl. Up I came in purposeful pursuit, gone with thoughts of knowledge coming first. Sweets undo intelligence. Cut out indifferent literary ability and dull flow of sentence, run in light, lovely, soft memories of Miss Crawford sharing sweets. Smile of joy at inclusion in tin, dining yet out on literary mind, on poet Seamus Heaney, Dr. Faustus, Shakespeare lingers, still shifting and settling like sand.
As a deputy head responsible for the pastoral care of the girls, Michelle would be managing general levels of ease and unease and bumpiness and happiness on a daily basis, always looking to improve the systems in place. She was the stalwart of all things council, and I'm sure that Miss Costa's intentions are more present in our current system because of Michelle's mere first-hand knowledge. Here she is, Here she is, with head girl Anna Hawthorne and two of the counsellors, Henny Pote and Henny Carr, in her final year. Michelle always looked for good change, and following a school inspection where pastoral care was deemed as ever excellent, she still looked to improve our system, suggesting a senior pastoral team in 2007. Now today this continues to be a means by which every single child not mentioned as a cause for concern in any other meeting can be considered individually. And the concept of the senior pastoral team, as well as the neuro wellbeing team, continue to impress the inspectors this summer. Again, Michelle's legacy living on. Daisy Ogle recalled the care and the compassion of Michelle's pastoral care when her mother died. Michelle ensured that Daisy's Uncle Clive came to school to deliver his one-man performance of the Christmas Carol that year, which meant everything to Daisy. Her parent, Jan Carlyle, wrote, "She's much loved and missed, and that doesn't even touch it. She was Witchwood through and through, and I missed her laughter when I no longer saw her. What a giggler she was." And other parents were involved in Michelle's poetry outreach, often long after their daughters had left the school. Initially, she would teach out of the music room and then latterly from home in Southdown Road. Her passion for Milton, Chaucer, Heaney, Larkin, Dylan Thomas was wonderful, and it was a great privilege to be a part of that with those parents and others, some here today, under Michelle's tutelage. And Lucy is going to treat us to a reading.
I'm going to read from the introduction of Under Milkwood by Dylan Thomas. To begin at the beginning. It is spring, moonless night in the small town, starless and Bible black. The cobbled streets silent, and the hunched quarters of rabbits, wood limping invisible down to the slow black, crow black fishing boat bobbing the sea. The houses are blind as moles, though moles seem fine tonight in the snouting velvet dingles. Or blind as Captain Cat, there in the muffled middle by the pump and the town clock. The shops in mourning, the welfare hall in widow's weeds, and all the people of the lulled and dumbfound town are sleeping now. Hush, the babies are sleeping. The farmers, the fishers, the tradesmen and pensioners, cobbler, school teacher, postman and publican, the undertaker and the fancy woman, drunkard, dressmaker, preacher, policeman, the webfoot cocker women, and the tidy wives. Young girls lie bed soft or glide in their dreams with rings of trousseau, bridesmaided by glowworms down the aisles of the organ-playing wood. The boys are dreaming wicked, or of the bucking ranches of the night and the jolly Rogered sea, and the anthracite statues of the horses sleep in the fields, and the cows in the burrows, and the dogs in the wet-nosed yards, and the cats nap in the slant corners or slope slide, streaking and needling on the one cloud of the roofs. If you hear the dew falling, and the hushed town breathing, only your eyes are unclosed to see the black unfolded town fast and slow asleep. And you alone can hear the invisible star fall, the darkest before dawn minutely dew rays stir of the black, damp-filled sea, where the Arethusa, the curlew and the skylark, Zanzibar, Rhiannon, the rover and the cormorant, and the Star of Wales tilt and bright. Listen, it is night moving in the streets. The processional salt slow musical wind in Coronation Street and Cockney Row. It is the grass glowing on Flagrope Hill, dewfall, starfall, the sleep of birds in Milkwood.
A few of us here today will remember very fondly the evening that the King's Singers performed in the new hut hall still going on then, 3 years old by 2009, and on the occasion of Michelle's retirement, this seemed a very fitting evening. It perhaps represents the start of the eve of Michelle's day. For Michelle, the evening was a joyous occasion. She said at the end of it she was able to hear every note. And we're going to just listen to a rendition that the King's Singers did that evening, Michelle Mother. Of course, the eve of the day at Wychwood, her retirement, allowed Michelle to focus more on a role of governance. And she spoke at the wonderful and mammoth 120th celebrations that so many of you here today helped to make happen as a governor. Andrea Johnson was the head by then, having taken over from Sue Wingfield Digby in 2012. And Andrea described Michelle as a professional of the first rank, diligent beyond all normal expectations, and one who held Wychwood rightly as one of the most important schools in Oxford, and who was fundamental in making that. The event was a wonderful celebration of Wychwood, and it was so lovely to see old friends coming together. You came to meet up and to share memories, and to explore the site on what was a glorious June day. Michelle was initially a boarding governor, then a teaching and learning governor, and eventually served on the charitable board, attending her final meeting online in April, I think it was, this year. Less glamorously, she did the thankless task of filing and colour-coding the records of past pupils in a rather cramped basement archive space, far too occasionally able to focus on actually interesting archive material. And it is therefore absolutely appropriate that we consider her impact as a governor on those boards. And so we have asked Deborah Pluck to speak on that.
Michelle was appointed to the board in September 2010 and was the most wonderful person to have as a co-director. Always supportive, always sensible, and when she spoke, you listened. It's a bit scary though to have your former English language teacher read your emails, minutes, and so on, but she is absolutely the go-to person on Wychwood ethos and the internal workings of the school, having already taught at Wychwood for 38 years. One task the board has to do is to approve the whole raft of policies under which the school operates, keeping children safe, dress code, and so on. I do remember one occasion when Michelle was asked for her reflections on the current school policies. She replied very positively, saying they had a real feeling of not being generic, were clearly identifiable as being Wychwood owned, up to date and generally impressive. So encapsulating Michelle's view of how Wychwood should be. For me, she was someone you could say anything to and not be judged. She would always gently give you the other person's viewpoint and much encouragement besides. She was not afraid of change and thoroughly endorsed the collaboration with the school's new partner and the move to being co-ed. I totally miss those times after a board meeting when the wine would come out and we would chew the cud.
I don't think you're on your own, Deborah.
As for the staff, it is probably impossible to count in total all those who have worked with Michelle. Wychwood was and remains a most convivial place to work. The mantra was that the school existed on the goodwill of staff to go over and above what was expected of them, and this mindset and commitment was inspiring. Michelle would sit quietly in the staff room marking her red books and get a sense of what was going on, and subtly or not so subtly set about dealing with any issues. She once described the role of being a deputy head to me, metaphorically of course, as similar to being the rudder of a ship, almost imperceptibly, making sure that everything stayed on course, and under her direction, it definitely did. Who better to reflect on this than Mrs. Wingfield Digby, who really sadly can't be here today. Michelle and Sue were a very quietly effective and efficient, understated, unfussy senior management team from 1997 to 2009. Michelle as deputy head had first met Sue in 1985 when she came for interview, and Sue describes her then as already a legend. They had the deepest respect for each other, and Michelle confided in Sue that these were some of her fondest years. To observe them working on a point of some import or a point upon which they had contrary views was a privilege. Always and without fail, the child was at the centre of their discussion, and the situation was dealt with thoroughly and with absolute integrity. To observe their management of the school was to observe two mutually appreciative professionals with complementary skill sets, working towards the absolute best in any given moment, any given situation, for those that they served, and the respect they had for each other was palpable. In the 2009 magazine, as she observed the challenge of trying to do justice to Miss Crawford in the opening pages, Sue said she was the most fearful of all. And now, 14 years later, how do you encapsulate Michelle, her career here at Wychwood, and all that she stood for after 52 years? Perhaps simply in the fact that we are all here, sharing such wonderful stories and reflections. Michelle is in each of us in a unique and in a powerful way. Yes, she is synonymous with what we would call great literature, and yes, she adored teaching poetry, especially. And she also really enjoyed just sitting down and having a cup of Lady Grey tea at break, sharing delicious freshly baked apple cakes bursting with flavour from the fruit in her garden. And goodness knows when she found the time to make those, but they would come in thick and fast. Having observed so many of her unseen poetry lessons, I now know that you can never let a simile go. I see her essay structure in horses and carts and in categories of groceries and shopping trolleys, and like most of you, I now see developed and sophisticated analysis in onions and in a high-quality fruitcake rather than a drab, yellow, railway station excuse of a cellophane wrapper cake that barely does the job with just a couple of sultanas and half a slice of cherry. That will barely get you a pass mark. Her gastronomic metaphors clearly resonated as much as her actual sweetie tin did with her A-level pupils in the latter years. She was a strong and a principled woman, yet her strength was paradoxically never more present than in her physical weakness. At the end of her teaching career, far from teaching prostrate lying on the English room floor, conducting her lessons as though nothing was amiss, the girls hanging on her every word, which was one of Sue's first memories of an English lesson in Richmond, she was teaching from crutches or even a wheelchair, and little removes in tow would arrive with bags of books and personal belongings delivered immediately a lesson began. Downhearted? Not at all. Indeed, far better to demonstrate the iambic pentameter with an actual link and to consider aging and illness in unseen poems by being able to describe it on a personal level. Girls still hung on her every word, and her wisdom and instinctive awareness simply made the most of every opportunity. And the girls did her proud when she left, although we weren't sure quite what she meant, what she thought of the message on the blackboard. Michelle had planned that English room as it was, and she loved it, surrounded by her teaching texts, with an eye out to the school on both sides, and of course her annual displays of poetry, the village, and Greek gods. Tributes were led on that day by Mrs. Wingfield Digby, and further tributes followed from Eppie Howard, one of the head girls. Tori and Jess in the remove, who had carried her bag from class to class, presented her with a book of thoughts and messages from the girls, and she was genuinely delighted, and she told them so. History, whether we knew it or not, was being made in assembly that day. And even though celebrations continued in the staff room, I'm not sure we really considered the extent of the link with the history of the school that was so very gently easing away from us, as Michelle was so full of her plans for remaining in touch and for being a governor and returning to take extension classes and just simply being the presence that we had all had the privilege of being accustomed to. And it was therefore with enormous sadness and a fleeting sense of disbelief that an end of the metaphorical day had actually come on the 8th of May 2023, although it had been expected. Michelle had beaten cancer twice and been in and out of hospital for various surgeries over the course of just my career here, and it just didn't seem possible. But what is possible at this point in our memories is to turn to her favourite poet and author, John Donne, for some context. A master of not just poetry, but also sermons. And he contextualises life and death on a continuum. A flat world map would have the east on the right and the west on the left. But if you lift that map and roll that map around so that the globe becomes evident, then the beginning is the end and the end is the beginning. And this is echoed in those final lines of Michelle's favourite poem, A Valediction Forbidding Mourning. And if you miss, there are some postcards on the table if you miss getting one on the way in. Daisy has been taught this poem by Michelle many times and is going to share with us what Michelle said about valediction.
To be taught Donne by Michelle was one of the great privileges of my life. She delighted in Donne when he was in comic mode, envying the flea perched on his lady, lamenting the rising of the sun, in praise again of the companion of his night. But he meant most to her, I think, when he spoke not just of the joys of life, but of mourning and bereavement, when he provided an imaginative landscape through which to understand the ways that connection endures even amongst loss. Valediction Forbidding Mourning shares something of the clarity with which Michelle herself expressed complicated things. It's also, though, a poem that gives you more the harder you work at understanding it. Thus, Michelle viewed it with absolute confidence as a poem for teenagers, a text that could unlock experience, perhaps even before the parameters of that experience might have been fully understood. In classes on this poem, she took us through the still life quality of its opening, highlighting the precision of Donne's description of the way life leaves the body. From there, she opened up theories of heavenly music via an excursion into 17th century conceptions of the chiming of the spheres, in which complicated history was again made entirely intelligible and sensible. And from there, she guided her classes through Donne's final stanzas, past the dull lovers whose relationship only endures when they're together, towards that famous image of a pair of compasses, representing a couple joined together, anchoring each other, deriving strength even when apart. Donne's poem endures, I think, because it speaks not just of the way that lovers uphold one another, but of how all those who shape the patterns of our life go on sustaining us even when they're gone. I last heard this poem read aloud at my father's funeral in 2021, when the lessons Michelle imparted decades ago gave me a language to draw on in the absence of my own words, and it is a total honour to be asked to read Valediction Forbidding Morning aloud in Michelle's memory today. As virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper to their souls to go, while some of their sad friends do say the breath goes now and some say no, so let us melt and make no noise, no tear floods nor sigh tempests move, to a profanation of our joys to tell the laity of our love. Moving of the earth brings harms and fears, men reckon what it did and meant, but trepidation of the spheres, so greater far, is innocent. Dull, sublunary lovers love, whose soul is sense, cannot admit absence, because it does remove those things which elemented it. But we, by a love so much refined, that ourselves know not what it is, enter assured of the mind, careless, eyes, lips, and hands to miss. Our two souls, therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion, like gold to airy thinness beat. If they be two, they are two so, as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. And though it in the centre sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as that comes home. Such will that be to me, who must, like the other foot, obliquely run. Thy firmness makes my circle just, and makes me end where I begun.
The final two lines of the poem are now on Michelle's headstone in Wolvergate Cemetery. And when we announced Michelle's death, the tributes flooded in. And as we come to the end of the celebration of much, but by no means all, of what Michelle has meant to us, we are going to share a PowerPoint of some of the tributes that came. And we're going to play a piece of music recorded by Miss Art Jones, another circular image. We started with Laudable Hopefulness, and now we will play Spem in Alium, a Renaissance motet by Tallis. I have never put my hope in any other but in thee, God of Israel. In both Valedictions and in Alium, we find ourselves back to the beginning of our reflections and Michelle's eternal verity and strong faith. And may her song rest in peace. Please stay as long as you would like to read the tributes. Lunch is in the closet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.